So you just printed your very first face shell with your lenses, but you don't know how to process it? Don't worry, I got you. This tutorial will help you turn this into this. Hey y'all, it's me Pizza, and today I'm gonna show you how I process my lenses. First step, sanding. So for my first step, I use an 80 grit sandpaper to knock down all those layer lines, and I sand every nook and crannies of my lenses. In this process, you're gonna be doing a lot of sanding, so the main formula to get the perfect sanding is patience. All you need is patience.
2,000 years later.
So after sanding, it should look like this, and majority of the layer lines should be sanded down. So on to the next step, we're gonna go ahead and use 120 grit just to flatten out all the scratches the 80 grit has done, because 80 grit is more coarser than 120, so 120 will kind of clean up all the debris, all the scratches, and to flatten out evenly the lens you just sanded.
6.5 hours later.
Once finished sanding, it should look like this. Most of the layer lines are gone, and we're gonna continue on to the next step. Once we're done with the 120 grit, we're gonna go ahead and use 220 grit just to clean up the lens even more, to make it even more smoother, and to get rid of those unnecessary debris and scratches on the lenses.
1 eternity later.
After sanding with 220, your lens should look like this. Most of the layer lines should be gone, and we're gonna go ahead and continue on to the next step. Take note, make sure all the layer lines are gone before going into the next step. If you still see any layer lines while sanding 220, keep sanding until all those layer lines are gone. One of the crucial part on processing the lenses is bondoing. So on my bondo, I usually mix my bondo with isopropyl alcohol, and I usually do the 2:1 ratio. But to be honest though, there's no specific ratio. I just turn my bondo into milky consistency, so it's easier for me to brush it on the lenses. And also bondo has a very strong VOC, so it smells really bad, so I suggest you have to wear a protective mask, so to protect yourself, because you're mixing chemicals, alcohol, and bondo, and it's very dangerous to your health. So after mixing the bondo, just brush it all over the lenses. I usually start from the front face of the lenses, and then I'll move to the side where some of the parts were sanded properly, or I focus onto the parts where there are holes in it. So I usually do 2 coats of brushes of the bondo, and then after that I dry it and then wait 24 hours until I move to the next step.
298 frozen patties later.
Once the bondo is dry, we're just gonna use a 400 grit. Take note on this one, don't sand hard when using 400 grit. Just lightly sand it to loosen the bondo that is brushed onto the lenses. Just keep on sanding it until you see the bondo fill the cracks and the holes that wasn't sanded properly.
7:59 a.m.
Once you knock down all the bondo, we're gonna go ahead and use 600 grit just to clean up and to smoothen out the bondo that's been brushed into the lenses, and to finalize the lens before priming it.
3 days later.
As you can see, all the holes have been filled up with bondo, and we smoothen it out with the sandpaper with this 600 grit, and we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next step. So for this one, very straightforward. I am using a duplicolor filler and sandable primer, and we're only gonna do a light coat of spray on the lenses. This is my first coat, and just lightly spray your lenses, spray every nook and crannies of it.
Much later.
After 15 minutes or so, we're gonna go ahead and do a second coat. Take note, don't overspray your lenses. Please never overspray. Once finished priming, your lens should look like this.
I'm about to come.
The purpose of wet sanding is to get an even surface finish after dry sanding. Dry sanding shapes the surface, while wet sanding removes the large scratches left by dry sanding. So if you don't do it correctly, the surface finish will gradually level out and the scratches will become smaller and smaller until they are no longer visible when the light reflects off of them. So for this one, I am using a 800 grit sandpaper and I'm just like gonna continue sanding it until most of the paint from the filler primer is removed.
Several song-filled hours later.
So once you finish sanding it with 800 grit, most of the paint is gone and your lens should look like this. So if light reflects off of it, it will look shiny and most of the layer lines are like gone, like completely gone. So we're just gonna continue ahead and make the lens even more smoother. For this one, I am using a 1000 grit sandpaper and I will just gonna continue sanding it until the lens is even more smoother and more shinier.
3 days later.
After sanding it, it should look like this. Very smooth, very shiny, no more layer lines. But if you see more layer lines in your lenses, just continue wet sanding it with 1000 grit until you can't see any more layer lines present in your lenses. Okay, so a little side note here. The reason why I sand my lenses all the way to the smoothest possible is because I am using an airbrush. So when you use an airbrush, the paint is atomized into a very fine particles. So it creates a thin, controlled layer of paint, which is very great for precision, but it's not thick enough to fill in or cover those layer lines. So we're gonna compare it now to a spray can. Spray cans are designed to apply a thicker coat of paint because they don't atomize the paint as finely as an airbrush. So technically, the thicker the spray, the better it hides the layer line more effectively. So no matter how thick your paint is in airbrushing, if your surface isn't smooth enough to begin with, those layer lines will show eventually. That's why sanding is the key. By sanding your part to the smoothest finish possible, you're removing those lines entirely, giving your paint a flawless surface to adhere to. When you spray over a perfectly smooth surface, whether you're using an airbrush or spray can, you'll get a much better result. So we're gonna go ahead and start painting. So I mix my paint. I am using an acrylic paint mixed with a thinner and I mix it with 2:1 ratio. So 2:1 ratio, it would look like a milky kind of consistency. So once you get that consistency, you just put it on your airbrush and you can start painting. Just paint your lenses evenly and just make sure that all parts, nooks and crannies is evenly painted out. And after you finish painting it, it should look like this.
I'm about to blow. No.
So after you spent time painting your lenses, the final touch is top coating. This is not only to give your lens a polished look, but it also adds a protective layer to keep the scratches and scuffs away. For this one, I always use a satin top coat. To me, it gives the lenses a nice soft sheen, just enough to look slick but not too glossy. Satin finishes are great for reducing the reflections, which is very perfect for my taste. The top coat not only makes the lens look amazing, but it also protects it from daily wear and tear, helping it prevent minor scratches from damaging the surface of the paint. So I got my acrylic sheet. I am using a very thin one, around 0.2mm, which is very ideal for this process. And I got my mold. So in this case, I am using a simple spherical metal bowl. Now the idea here is to use the bowl as our mold and we're gonna hit the acrylic so it becomes soft and flexible. Then we'll press the bowl to the acrylic to form that dome shape. And there you have it, a perfectly domed acrylic sheet. It's got that nice curved shape we are going for. This method is very quick, easy, and doesn't require any complex tools or equipment. So start placing your acrylic directly on top of the lens. Make sure it's positioned securely because this will ensure an accurate trace. Now, take a fine tip marker and carefully trace the outline of your lens onto the acrylic sheet. Be precise and take your time because this outline will guide your cutting. So once you trace your outline, you can remove the acrylic and start cutting it. But before moving on, double check that the trace shape matches exactly to the lenses. So if needed, you can make small adjustments to the outline. And there you have it. You can see how it adds more volume to the lens shape. It also makes the lens pop even more. You can also do this method in doing the template of the meshes, which we're gonna do on the next step. So this one is very easy. We're just gonna grab the acrylic that we just cut and we will just gonna trace it and put it on top of the mesh and start cutting it. And to all of the people asking what mesh I am using a steel woven mesh 80. So the higher the number, the smaller the holes are. So if you need visibility, you need the wire mesh 80. So once we get our template, the mesh are now ready to be painted. So I forgot to record this, but never ever paint your mesh with a spray can because the spray of the spray can is very thick and it would just clog the holes of your mesh. So I suggest using an airbrush in painting your meshes. So after you finish painting it, assemble your lens and your lens should look like this. Very clean, very beautiful, very nice Spider-Man lens. So for the glue, I am using a strong, fast-drying super glue from Starbuns Adhesive. Make sure the glue you use is very strong enough to hold the magnets in place. You don't want to use something too weak or the magnets could pop off later. So now we're gonna go ahead and magnet your lenses to your Faceshell. So for this one, I am using a neodymium magnets. These are very strong, lightweight, and perfect for holding your lenses in place without using screws or clips. Make sure your magnets are in the positive and the negative so you don't mix them up together, because if you do so, it won't stick into your lenses. So what I usually do, I put the other magnets on top of the shell so I know which side I should glue on. So we're just gonna go ahead and continue putting the rest of the magnets onto the lenses. So once the glue is fully dry, test the magnets to make sure they're holding properly. Here, I am attaching the lenses to the Faceshell, and as you can see, they snap right into place and hold firmly. So just make sure to do this in each lenses to make sure that the glue is dry and the magnets are holding the lenses properly. So once that's done, we're gonna go ahead and do the final assembly.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details. Just like her.
So here it is, you just finished processing your very first 3D printed Spider-Man mask. I hope this tutorial helped you, and if you have any questions or issues, please let me know in the comments down below and I'll try to respond to them. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you on to the next video.